Well, I'd love to give my welcome on top of Nay's earlier. It's so good to see you. I've been part of the church here for somewhere around five plus years. Some of you will know me, some of you may not have done. I haven't actually been up on the stage for over a year, actually giving one of the messages, one of the talks. For me personally, it's been a difficult year or so. Some of you know that. I think I just want to say thank you to those of you who've really drawn alongside me with friendship and your support and your prayers. So I'm really grateful to you. I'm conscious as well that both in the room and at home, there'll be people with us tonight. For some of you, life is amazing right now. And you're thriving, you're in a season where it's all going well, and we want to celebrate that with you. For others, life is actually really tough. It's really gritty. And life really, really hurts. There's grief, there's anxiety, there's brokenness, there's pain. Well, that's just me. But, you know, I know it's shared by others as well. And I think we want to say that whatever you're going through, we want you to know how welcome you are here with us. So often we don't mean to necessarily, but we might kind of put on a mask or put on a show, maybe just to get through the day. And we want to say here, you don't have to. Please just feel free. Mess is allowed. In fact, it's kind of expected. I came across a church years ago, and they had a strapline that said this: "No perfect people allowed." And I kind of rather liked that. It made me feel accepted and free. So we want you to feel totally free tonight. Okay, we're in a new series tonight. I don't know if Nay might have mentioned that earlier. We're starting a new series. If you've been with us for some time, you'll know that this year we've got a theme that kind of holds the whole year together called Courageous Resistance. We're asking the question, what does courageous resistance look like for us as followers of Jesus in our lives, in our day, in our culture? What does that look like? And in the run-up to Easter, we had a series called Positive Testing, not testing positive. Thank goodness those days are behind us. Kind of. Well, actually, they're not really, but they are, but they're not. But that was the thing. And actually, testing, none of us want testing, but it can be positive with God. And that was a great series we had before Easter. And then last week, we finished the series. Remember what it was called? It's called Uncontainable. And we were just looking at the love of God, the presence of God, the power of God, and we're just exploring the fact that we can't put it in a box. We can't hold on to it. It's going to get out there, and we need to believe in a miracle-working God. It was a great series. If you missed last Sunday night, please go and check it out from our website or our YouTube channel. It was a great message, Uncontainable. I think Hills was giving it. So tonight, our topic, our series that we're starting tonight for the next few weeks is called Fruitfulness on the Frontlines. Now, what I'd love you to do is I'd love you to turn to the person next to you and look at that picture and chat to them about that picture. And what I need you to do is I want you to decide between you which town is it, which country is it, and which decade is it. No shouting out, turn to each other, 20, 30 seconds, which town, which country, which decade. Introduce yourself if you haven't met. Make them feel welcome. No. Okay, I'm going to try and settle you down. Okay, someone from up in the gallery, shout the answer. Someone thinks Cheltenham. Someone over here said Gloucester. That's actually taken from the roof of this building. And that's like Cleve Hill in the background, and that's our road just out there. Isn't it amazing? I didn't actually get that right myself. I had to ask someone, and that's a bit embarrassing because I work here. But there we are. You're going to spend the rest of the next 15, 20 minutes just looking at that now, aren't you, and going, oh, I know that building. Which decade? I think it was like last year that was taken. Hodges, where are you? You probably took it. But yeah, this decade. Okay. Tonight. Friends, tonight I want to speak about Jesus. That's our topic. That's the focus. He is the person I want to speak about tonight. We're going to be looking at Colossians chapter 1. If you've got a phone or a device or a Bible, better still, paper Bible, would you flick to the book of Colossians? It's one of the letters in the New Testament. We're in Colossians chapter 1. Paul is writing a letter here to the church in this town called Colossae. It's like in modern-day Turkey. Town called Colossae. He's not been there himself, but he's heard about the church that's there. He's heard about it from his friend called Epaphras. He's heard the reports. He's kind of in equal measure excited and concerned. They've got a very genuine faith, and he's like, oh, this is awesome. But he's heard some dodgy stuff's going on. There's some dodgy teachings, and he's getting concerned that that's getting traction among some of them, and it's going to steer them off course. And he is convinced if they don't kind of realign to the truth, their faith is going to get shipwrecked. So this letter is all about him longing for them to be rooted in the truth so that they won't get led astray by fine-sounding arguments. That's an expression, a phrase he uses in chapter 2. Fine-sounding arguments. I mean, that's kind of familiar to us, isn't it? Like we're bombarded. We've got our news feeds, our social media, just everything. There are so many fine-sounding arguments out there, but they're not all true. So in chapter 1, this is a beautiful part. In chapter 1, he first kind of brings them into his prayer life for them. He's telling them what he is praying for them. And then there's this beautiful moment. We get to verse 13, just glance down at it. He mentions Jesus, the Son, in verse 13. And then suddenly it's like, he kind of catches his breath and he's like, whoa, hang on a moment. I need to tell you more about Jesus. And like from verse 15, that paragraph after verse 15, it's almost like he's going off on a tangent. He's digressing, like sidebars, like, hang on, I need you to hear this bit. And what comes out is one of the most beautiful, powerful nuggets about the person of Jesus in the entire New Testament. There is so much noise in our lives, like it's constant. How many times today has your phone binged, beeped, buzzed, whatever? How many times? How many times have you picked it up? There is so much noise. We are getting constant messages, notification, constant information all the time. I wonder whether tonight, just before we go on, maybe we need to take a breath. Maybe we need to stop and go, and maybe, if you're feeling brave, when was the last time you actually turned your phone off? I mean, imagine, try it, like for 30 minutes even. I think you'll still be okay at the end of it, but just maybe, because maybe God wants to say something to you tonight that you would miss if actually, let me just check that message. Let me just check that score. Whatever it is. And sometimes we need to stop. Sometimes we need to catch our breath if we're to hear his voice amongst all the noise. So just think about that. Now we're going to look at verses 15 to 20 of Colossians 1. And Paul here, he turns his gaze towards Jesus. And he says this. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Did you notice how many times it said all things? So many. Just look at it. It's like all things, all things, all things. Paul's trying to make a point. Paul is trying to say it is all about Jesus. It is all about Jesus. If you're trying to make sense of life and your place in it, start here. Start with Jesus. Don't start with yourself. I know the sort of the self-help world and pop psychology. They tell us to do all these sorts of things. They say, look inside and be true to yourself and pursue your dreams and do whatever makes you happy as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Friends, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just leaves us empty. And despite our bookshops being filled with this kind of wisdom, there is more brokenness in our world today than in any other time of human history. Instead, Paul would say, look to Jesus. Discover what he is really like. Explore who he is. I mean, is this true? Is this who he is? Is he really God? There was a little girl who was drawing a picture, and her mummy said to her, hey, darling, what are you drawing? And she said, I'm drawing a picture of God. And rather unkindly, the mum sort of said, oh, don't be silly, darling. You can't be drawing a picture of God. Nobody knows what God looks like. To which the little girl held up a piece of paper and said, yeah, but they will when I've finished. I wonder if we were walking around 2,000 years ago with Jesus, and if we had actually asked Jesus, what are you doing? I think he might have said, I'm drawing a picture of God. Don't be silly, Jesus. Can't be drawing a picture of God. Nobody knows what he looks like. I think he would have replied, if you want to know what God is like, look at me. How I speak, how I treat people, what I say, how I live. If you want to know what God is like, look at me. One author calls him, or described him as God with skin on. God with skin on. Paul in verse 15 says he is the image of the invisible God. In verse 19, it says, God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him. In John's Gospel, John chapter 1, famous chapter in the Bible, John speaks of the word, in Greek it's the word logos, it's where we get logic from, logical. And it kind of means the reason why. And John says, the word was God, and the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. In Philippians, Paul says Jesus is described as being in very nature God. In Hebrews, it says he's the exact representation of God's being. And Jesus himself said, whoever has seen me has seen the Father. He's God with skin on. I guess my question tonight is do you know him? Because he wants to be known. Are you spending time with him because he wants your attention? Are you exhausted? So many are going to nod for that one. He says, come to me and I will give you rest. Do you feel lost? He says, I am the way. Okay, confession time. I've become a bit of a blubber. Now, I know it's a bit embarrassing. Don't tell anyone. But I mean, I used to kind of think of myself as quite tough. I probably told you some kind of army stories of my past, trying to impress you. But the truth is, a number of years ago, God did a number on me. And I have become a blubber. I cry at almost anything these days. I cry when friends tell me something personal to them, whether it's good news or bad news. I'm just like, I start welling up. And some of you have experienced that, and I apologize because it just gets awkward. I cry when I watch TV shows. And especially if there's like this father-son like moment, like maybe they're reconciling or one's affirming the other. I'm a wreck. It's a mess. And then recently I've kind of got to a new level of disastrous crying where I've found myself literally bursting into tears, didn't see it coming, woof, there you come. And the thing that's done it is a program called The Chosen. Got a slide coming up for The Chosen in a minute. Hey, has anyone seen The Chosen? Just give me a wave if you're like you're familiar with The Chosen. Friends, if you haven't, oh my goodness, it is beautiful. The Chosen is a depiction of the life of Jesus as kind of seen and experienced through his disciples. And it is absolutely brilliant. And it wrecks me every time. I think the thing that has moved me so much is how they have captured and how they convey the heart and character of Jesus in the way that he interacts with people. Now, we see it in the words of the gospel. It's so beautiful, but they've captured it. The actors and scriptwriters and producers, it's astonishing. The heart and character of God flows through. It's how he treats people, how he loves people, how he speaks, how he listens, and how he welcomes the broken and the hurting. And I think my bursting into tears, and it's been about half a dozen times, I think it's because I've just had this fresh realization through this show of how kind our God is, that our pain matters to him so deeply, that he loves so much, even me, even you. Tim Keller, the author, writing about Jesus, notes his tenderness without weakness, his strength without harshness, his humility without the slightest lack of confidence, his holiness and unbending convictions without the slightest lack of approachability. He talks about his power without insensitivity, his passion without prejudice. Keller notes Jesus had the harshest judgment on the self-satisfied and yet the most winsome kindness to the broken and the marginal. Friends, if you have never got to know this Jesus, the Jesus of Scripture, maybe tonight is an invitation for you to do so. He already knows you. He already loves you. You don't have to clean up your act first. He just says, come. He just says, come. Come as you are. Do you know, there are some of us in this room as well. You're like, you've been coming to church for years and years and years. You've been a Christian for years. You might even serve here in the church life on one of the teams. And somehow your passion, your connection, your gaze has somehow just shifted off the person of Jesus, and it's almost like he has gone out of focus. I wonder whether tonight is the time to realign your gaze on him. Allow his beauty to re-captivate you by his kindness, his character, his heart for you. Friends, this is the gospel. This is the story of Christianity. This is what it's all about, that we can know him. You know, gospel means good news. There is no better news. This is absolutely life-changing. It's an invitation to come to him, to be forgiven, to do life with him every step of the way. With him every step of the way. Now, the rest of this chapter 1, Paul, I think, wants to remind us of a few things. He wants to remind us of how this is possible, how we can know him. And he just says 3 things. I want to speed through them really fast. In verse 14, he says, in Jesus we've got redemption, the forgiveness of sins. I think he wants to just remind them. He's acknowledging that sin is a problem, that sin stuffs things up. It ruins everything. Sin is basically when I want to put myself first, and I want to do things my way. Someone once said, sin is a little word with I in the middle, S-I-N. It's like me in the middle, me-centered. It just destroys everything. It damages me. It damages our relationships with one another. It damages our relationship with God. So Paul is like calling it out. And then in verse 19, he says God was pleased through Jesus to reconcile, to kind of like come back, to reconcile to himself all things, making peace through his blood shed on the cross. You see, this is why Jesus came. This is why Jesus came. This was the mission. God himself, in the person of Jesus, came to die so that he could pay the price for your sin, for my sin, all my mess, all my mistakes, all my stuff-ups, paid, done, so that we wouldn't have to, so that we could be forgiven. And then in verse 22, just past our passage, he says this, so through that death, to present us holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. Now, there's no way I deserve that. Nick, without blemish, free from accusation, not a chance. it's been called sometimes, this has been called the great exchange. It's like Jesus is saying, Nick, I'll have all of that stuff, mess, dirt, darkness. I'll have it. Give it all here, give it all here, give it all here. And in exchange, you can have my holiness and my righteousness, the great exchange. I've earned none of it. It cost me nothing. It cost him everything. Well, I just said it cost me nothing. In one sense, that is true. I can never earn this forgiveness. I can never earn God's approval. It's not like weighing scales where like maybe my good deeds can outweigh all my mess. And all like I said, that's not how it works at all. Jesus paid for it all. This is a gift. But there is a cost. And sometimes I think we might do a disservice if we don't let you guys know what the cost is, if we don't tell other people. Actually, there is a cost. And the cost comes in our response. In Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, my paraphrase, it says, he died for me that I would live for him. Our response is to give him everything, is to acknowledge, you've done it all, have it all. That's our response. It's saying, Lord, I give you my life. That's one of the songs we sing, isn't it, from time to time? It's be the center. There's another song that we sing. It's you died for me, I choose to live for you. Your will be done. And you see, what Jesus does is he starts to change our perspective. He starts to change our priorities. If you've, maybe just right now, just have a quick look around the room. We've got young and we've got old. Just have a quick glance. A bit awkward, isn't it, looking at someone? Uh-oh, they looked at me at the same time, eyes met. Ooh, awkward. No, just have a quick look around. There are some sitting in the room who've been walking with Jesus for weeks, others months, others years, others decades. I guarantee it. You go and chat to someone who's been walking with Jesus for years and years and years and say to them, has it been worth it? They will tell you it has absolutely been worth it. The stuff that they may have had to let go and say, okay, Lord, I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't need that anymore. You have that. I'm laying it down. I'm moving away because you want me to live a whole life. They might have given some stuff up. There might have been a cost in one sense. Was it worth it? Every one of them will say, oh my goodness, it was absolutely worth it. Now, you probably noticed that life can be tough. Life actually can be brutal at times. It's important we notice that Jesus never promises to put us in a bubble so that bad things don't happen to us. In fact, actually, he warns us. Life can be so hard. The story of the early church is full of pain. Even in this chapter, verse 24 of chapter 1, Paul speaks of his own suffering. So Jesus doesn't promise that we won't face tough times, but he does promise never to leave us in them. He doesn't promise to keep us from the fire. He promises to be with us in the fire. The final episode of season 3 of The Chosen. See, I'm going back to it because it's just wrecked me. Don't worry, this is not a spoiler. But the final episode of season 3, we get an insight into Peter. He has been having a rough time personally. We see some of his backstory. He is hurting. He is broken. He's angry. He's confused. He's kind of got it in his head that God doesn't care what he's going through. And at one point, he actually shouts at Jesus and he's like, hello, I've been in front of you the whole time. Just like, you just don't see what's going on, is how Peter is expressing himself. A bit later on, he says, I've given up everything to follow you, and still you haven't sorted out the mess. It's so easy for us to get it into our head that God kind of owes us, that like we deserve a break, don't we? It's so easy to kind of think, and then if the situation doesn't change, it's like, well, he doesn't love me. And that's just not how it is. Some of you, this is your story. This is your story right now. You're in pain. You just don't get why God is not sorting it. This encounter, as the encounter with Peter and Jesus unfolds, he realizes that Jesus has been fully aware of his story all the time, of his pain, the whole time. And actually, the opposite of him abandoning Peter in the tough times, Jesus is actually working. He says he's working in him through it all. And the scene is, the ending of that scene is astonishing. You've got Peter, he is hanging on to Jesus, literally giving him a kind of a hug, and it's like, and he is, through his sobs, he's just saying, "Don't let me go. Don't let me go. Don't let me go." It's one of the most profound prayers, and it's just extraordinary. Peter was sobbing on the TV. I was sobbing on the sofa, obviously. That's what I do. But I think tonight we get the chance to gaze on Jesus afresh. Maybe see him differently. Maybe see him fresh. And the thing is, it's as we gaze on him, it's as we trust him, it's as we look to him, that's when Jesus becomes present in our pain, in our distress. Last week, it's really important that this week follows last week. Last week, we were talking about the power of prayer. We do have a miracle-working God. We do. And we will not stop praying and believing for God to show up supernaturally in our world. Absolutely. But he's also the one who draws close when the darkness comes in our suffering. In fact, it's sometimes through the suffering that we get to know him even more. It's not a contradiction at all. It's a both and. And this is the good news, that we get to know him, get to experience his love today and every day in every different season of our lives. And it's such good news, Jesus doesn't want us to keep it to ourselves. So this is kind of like where I point to the title of our kind of series. I'm kind of almost not touching on it. Apart from, it's all about Jesus. This is our series, Fruitfulness on the Frontlines. And just a word about those two words there, beginning with F. Frontlines is the kind of place where we most frequently interact with those who don't yet know Jesus. Forget the kind of military connotation at the moment. It doesn't mean they are enemies. There is an enemy, and he doesn't want them to get to know Jesus, but they're not enemies. That's important we know. So front lines, where we most frequently interact. I wonder what it is for you. It might be school. It might be uni. It might be your workplace. It might be the school gate. Where is the place? It might be social media. Where is the place that you most frequently interact with those who don't yet know Jesus? That's your front line. And God's wanting us to be fruitful in that place. And we can explore fruitfulness much more over the coming weeks. Just worth noting, in Colossians 1, this chapter we're looking at, Paul mentions this idea of fruit twice. He says in verse 6, the gospel is bearing fruit all over the world. And in verse 10, Paul is praying that we may live a life worthy of the Lord, that we may please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work. Fruitfulness on the front lines. I'm looking forward to the weeks coming as we explore this, as we take risks, as we kind of figure out how it is we can share the news of this person, Jesus, this God who became man to die for us. It's extraordinary.